Imagine this. A Roman general stands between two armies. Behind him, 80,000 starving Gauls trapped on a hilltop fortress. Before him, 250,000 warriors howling for his blood. He is outnumbered 5-1. He has no reinforcements, no escape route, no logical chance of survival. And this man, this bald politician who learned war in middle age, does something that defies every rule of combat ever written. He orders his men to stop facing the enemy. He orders them to build another wall, behind them, trapping themselves in a ring of their own making. This is not a battle. This is a suicide pact signed in dirt and timber. This is the moment Rome bet everything on the madness of one man. Alesia, 52 BC. The siege that should have been impossible. The trap that caught everyone inside it. The day Gaul died screaming between two walls. Gaul had bled for 7 years. Caesar had marched his legions through lands no Roman had ever named. He had burned villages that existed before Rome was born. He had sold entire tribes into chains, erased peoples from history, turned fertile lands into graveyards. He wrote letters to the Senate describing his pacification. The Gauls had another word for it: annihilation. But Gaul was not a corpse. Gaul was a wounded animal, waiting for the right moment to bite. And in the winter of 53 BC, that animal found its teeth. His name was Vercingetorix, son of a chieftain executed for reaching too high. A young man raised in the shadow of Roman power, educated in Roman tactics, burning with a hatred that 7 years of slaughter had forged into something pure. He understood what no Gallic leader before him had grasped. You cannot defeat Rome in open battle. The legions are a machine. They eat courage for breakfast. They turn bravery into corpses. To kill Rome, you must starve it. Vercingetorix rode from tribe to tribe with a message that should have been impossible. Forget your feuds. Forget your pride. Forget the blood debts your grandfathers owed. Unite, or watch your children sold in Roman markets. 40 tribes answered. 40 tribes who had warred against each other for generations. He welded them together with a single brutal strategy: burn everything. The Scorched Earth campaign began in spring. Gallic hands set fire to Gallic farms. Warriors watched their own granaries burn. Mothers wept as villages their great-grandmothers had built turned to ash. This was not war. This was self-mutilation as strategy, and it worked. Caesar's legions marched into a wasteland. Foraging parties returned with empty carts. Supply lines stretched thin, then snapped. Horses died. Men deserted. The mighty Roman machine began to sputter and cough. For the first time in 7 years, Caesar was not the hunter. He was prey. But Vercingetorix made a mistake. One mistake. The kind of mistake that separates legends from footnotes. He stopped running. After a failed assault on a Roman allied town, Vercingetorix retreated to Alesia, a fortress on a hilltop. Strong walls, good position. 80,000 warriors behind timber and stone. He thought he was safe. He thought the Romans would exhaust themselves against his defenses while his messengers summoned the relief army. He thought time was on his side. He was wrong. Caesar looked at Alesia and saw something Vercingetorix did not: a trap waiting to be sprung. The fortress sat on a plateau surrounded by river valleys. Strong, yes, but also isolated. If you could build a wall around that plateau, nothing could get in or out. His officers calculated the numbers: 18 kilometers of fortification, trenches, ramparts, towers, artillery, around terrain that laughed at straight lines, with an enemy army watching from above, with more enemies coming from every direction. Impossible, they said. Caesar did not argue. He simply gave the order: build. What rose from the Gallic earth over the next 3 weeks was not a wall. It was a monument to Roman madness. The legions worked in shifts, day and night, digging trenches 4 meters wide, flooding them with river water, raising ramparts 4 meters high, studding them with sharpened stakes that pointed at the sky like accusations. But the real horror lay in front of the trenches. The soldiers called it the garden. Would you like to know what grew in Caesar's garden? The garden was designed by engineers who understood fear. First came the cipi, 5 rows of sharpened logs, buried at angles, their points hidden in tall grass. A man charging at full speed would impale himself before he knew they existed. Then came the lilia, named after the flower, though nothing bloomed here but death. 8 rows of pits, each 3 feet deep, each hiding a fire-hardened stake at the bottom, covered with brush and dirt, invisible until you were screaming at the bottom. Then came the stimuli, iron barbs scattered across the ground like seeds of agony. They punched through leather. They punched through feet. They turned a charge into a crawling massacre. 300 meters of hell before a Gaul could reach the first Roman spear. And still, Caesar was not finished. Vercingetorix had sent riders into the night. Before the walls closed completely, his cavalry had broken through with orders for every tribe in Gaul. Come now, bring everyone. This is our last chance. Caesar knew the riders had escaped. He knew what was coming. The full fury of Gaul descending on his rear while he stared at a fortress he could not assault. Most generals would have withdrawn, cut their losses, lived to fight another day. Caesar gave an order that made his own centurions question his sanity. Build another wall, facing outward, 21 kilometers of fortification facing the horizon, the same trenches, the same stakes, the same garden of hidden death, but this time pointing away from Alesia, pointing at an enemy that had not yet arrived. The Romans called the inner wall the circumvallation, the outer wall the contravallation. Together, they formed a ring of death, with the legions trapped in the middle. 70,000 Romans, 80,000 Gauls on the hill, and soon, 250,000 more Gauls coming from every direction. Caesar had built a cage and locked himself inside. Either the cage would hold, or everyone inside it would die. There was no third option, but the real trap had not yet been revealed. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched the walls rise and understood too late. He had traded a war of movement for a siege of stomachs. Whoever starved first would die, and he had 80,000 mouths to feed on a hilltop with no farms, no supply lines, no hope except the messengers riding toward the horizon. He rationed the grain, he slaughtered the horses and salted the meat. He counted the days. The relief army would come. It had to come. All of Gaul had been summoned, but the days stretched into weeks, and the grain bins emptied, and the children began to cry with a sound that cut through even the hardest warriors. The Mandubi tribe came to Vercingetorix with a proposal born of desperation. They were the people who owned Alesia. Their families, their elderly, their children filled the fortress alongside the warriors. Mouths that could not fight, mouths that consumed what little remained. Send them out, the chieftain said. The women, the children, the old. Let the Romans feed them, or let them pass. Either way, fewer mouths in Alesia. Vercingetorix looked at the empty granaries. He looked at the warriors growing weak. He looked at the walls that imprisoned them all. He agreed. What choice did he have? They came down the hill in the grey morning. Hundreds of civilians, women clutching infants, grandmothers who remembered a time before Roman boots touched Gallic soil, children who did not understand why their fathers stayed behind. They walked to the Roman walls. They raised their hands. They begged for food, for passage, for mercy. Caesar watched from a tower. His face revealed nothing. His officers awaited the order. Surely Rome would not let children starve in the mud. Surely there were limits even in war. Caesar turned away. The gates stayed closed. For days they died in the space between the walls, not from Roman swords, from Roman silence. Mothers holding children who stopped crying, old men who sat down in the grass and never stood again. bodies swelling in the autumn sun. Both armies watched. Both armies did nothing. And both armies understood. There would be no mercy at Alesia. This was not a battle. This was extinction. On the 27th day, the horizon came alive. Dust rose in the west like a brown tide. Then the glitter of spears. Then the thunder of 250,000 feet. The relief army had arrived. Gauls from every corner of the land. Aedui, Arverni, Sequani, Bituriges, Lemovices. Tribes that had slaughtered each other for generations now marched under one banner. One purpose: break the walls, free Vercingetorix, annihilate Rome. From Alesia's heights, the trapped warriors saw their salvation. They screamed. They wept. They beat swords against shields until the sound rolled down the hill like the heartbeat of a god. Inside the Roman ring, the legions heard it too. They looked at the inner wall. They looked at the outer wall. They looked at the horizon filling with enemies. The mathematics of annihilation had arrived. The relief commanders were not fools. They had seen Roman walls before. They knew the garden of death that waited. They made camp on the western hills. They rested their men. They studied the fortifications. On the first night, they attacked at midnight. No warning. Just screams pouring across the darkness. Torches flickering like angry stars. 60,000 Gauls crashing against the outer wall, filling trenches with bundled sticks, scrambling over the bodies of brothers who fell in the Lilia pits. At the same moment, Vercingetorix unleashed his forces from Alesia. They carried ladders and hooks, ropes and axes. They hit the inner wall with the fury of men who had watched their families starve for a month. The Romans fought on two fronts, facing inward, facing outward, spread across 40 kilometers of fortification. This was the moment Caesar had built his trap for. This was the moment the trap nearly killed him. Dawn revealed the cost. The walls held. Barely. Entire sections had nearly collapsed. Reserves had been thrown into gaps before their time. Roman bodies lay tangled with Gallic bodies in the trenches. But it was only a probe. A test. The relief army had not committed its full strength. They were learning where the walls were weak, and they had found the weakness. The northwestern slope. Vercingetorix saw it from his hilltop. The relief commanders saw it from their camp. The terrain there had forced the Romans to build on uneven ground. The walls were thinner, the towers fewer, the gardens shallower, the weak point. Messengers slipped between the armies in darkness. A plan took shape. 60,000 of the best warriors from the relief army would hit the northwestern section at noon. Vercingetorix would launch everything he had left at the inner wall at the same moment. The hammer from outside, the anvil from within. The Romans crushed between. If this failed, nothing would save Gaul. The sun reached its peak. 60,000 Gauls moved toward the northwestern slope. Not a mob, a tide. So dense the earth trembled beneath them. Behind them, the rest of the relief army demonstrated against the entire outer wall, pinning down every Roman cohort. From Alesia, Vercingetorix unleashed his final assault. Every man who could lift a spear, every warrior who could still stand. They poured down the hill with ladders and bridges, screaming war cries in languages Rome had tried to silence forever. The roar of 300,000 voices merged into a single sound, the sound of a world ending, or beginning. The northwestern wall began to die. Gauls crashed through the garden, screaming over the bodies of those who fell. They reached the rampart and tore at the stakes with bleeding hands. Roman defenders hurled pila until their arms failed, then drew swords and fought chest to chest on the parapet. A breach opened, then another. Warriors spilled through, cutting down Romans from behind, rolling up the defensive line like a scroll being burned. From Alesia, Vercingetorix saw it. The breach. The opening. His men were meters away from linking with the relief army. Victory was minutes away. But he had not counted on one thing: the man in the red cloak. Caesar received the report and moved. He stripped cohorts from sections that were holding. He grabbed reserves that did not exist. He pulled men from walls that might collapse the moment they left. Then he mounted his horse. He took his personal cavalry, and he rode directly toward the breach. The red cloak was visible across the entire battlefield. Every Roman saw it. Every Gaul saw it. Caesar himself, riding into the gap, sword drawn, fighting like a common legionary. The message needed no words. If this wall falls, I die with it. The counterattack hit like a thunderbolt. Fresh cohorts slammed into the Gallic breakthrough. Men who had watched their general ride into death found strength they did not know they possessed. They fought not for Rome, not for glory, not for pay. They fought for the bald man in the red cloak who had led them through 7 years of hell. The breach held, then shrank, then closed. Gauls who had broken through found themselves surrounded, cut off, butchered in the narrow space between the walls. The relief army's assault wavered, stalled, broke. Men who had charged screaming began to run screaming. Caesar did not let them run far. He unleashed his Germanic cavalry. Thousands of mounted warriors held in reserve for exactly this moment. They swept across the plain like wolves through scattered sheep. The relief army shattered. Fragments fled in every direction. Thousands were ridden down. Thousands more threw away their weapons and ran until their legs gave out. By nightfall, the largest army Gaul had ever assembled was gone, scattered, broken, leaderless. On Alesia's hill, 80,000 Gauls watched their last hope disappear over the horizon. The walls still stood, the Romans still stood, and there was nothing left. No food, no relief, no future. That night, Vercingetorix called his final council. The chieftains gathered in torchlight. Men who had ruled tribes, commanded thousands, dreamed of freedom. Now they stared at empty hands and full graves. Some argued for a final charge. Death with honor. Let the bards sing of Gauls who died on Roman spears rather than in Roman chains. Some argued for surrender. Perhaps Caesar would show mercy. Vercingetorix listened. Then he spoke. I started this war. The failure is mine. Let the price be mine alone. The next morning, a lone rider descended from Alesia. Finest armor, polished weapons, the last horse in the fortress, groomed until its coat gleamed. Vercingetorix rode to the Roman lines like a king attending his own execution. Caesar sat on a platform before his assembled legions, silent, waiting. Vercingetorix dismounted. He walked forward. He laid his weapons at Caesar's feet, sword, spear, dagger, then his armor, piece by piece, until he knelt in nothing but a simple tunic. The man who had united Gaul, the man who had nearly destroyed Rome, kneeling in the dirt before his conqueror. Caesar gestured to his guards. They dragged Vercingetorix away in chains. Here was Caesar's dilemma. What do you do with a symbol? Kill him now, and he becomes a martyr, a rallying cry for future rebellions. A ghost that haunts every Gallic campfire. Keep him alive, and he remains dangerous. A living reminder that Rome can be challenged. Caesar chose a third path. He chose to break the symbol completely. For 6 years, Vercingetorix rotted in the Tullianum, Rome's darkest prison, a pit beneath the Forum where light never reached. He was kept alive for one purpose only: to walk in Caesar's triumph, to be displayed in chains before jeering Roman crowds, to show the world what defiance costs. Then they strangled him in the dark and threw his body away. No grave, no monument, no memory, or so Rome believed. 2,000 years later, it is not Caesar's name carved on the hill of Alesia, it is Vercingetorix, the king who burned his own world rather than let Rome have it. Some victories cannot be won with walls.